Hey folks, you're watching Connor and this is episode 4, part 2 in the weekly fitness vlogs. What are you going to see in this episode? As always with part 2s, I try to make those more focused on training. So in this particular episode, I'm going to be showing you my deadlifts. Now with that in mind, I'm going to show you a commentary of the actual deadlift, and then I'm also going to chat about the overall principles that I'm trying to master to make sure that my posture improves so that I can both heal my injury, be as functional as possible, whilst also developing a great physique. Are you ready? Let's go. I want to start off by talking about why I'm actually doing all these things related to posture, because you're probably watching this and if you've never had an injury before or it's not something you've considered, then you probably don't care, right? Because I didn't care either. I'd seen stuff about postural improvement work prior and it never really dawned on me, right? Like I never really cared enough to look into it. I always assumed that my training methods were spot on until I got an injury and I was forced to realize they actually weren't. So why am I actually doing the posture stuff, and why should you care about it too, even if you haven't had an injury? Well, if all you care about is getting a good looking physique, which for most of you that will be the case, then you can't get that without an element of functionality behind it, right? So what does that mean? Well, if you're trying to build your chest, say for example, and your shoulders are sitting forward, you're just going to be hitting the top of your shoulders, so you're not actually going to be able to grow a decent chest. Similarly, if you're trying to train your back muscles, what's going to happen if you can't keep good posture and keep your chest up, your shoulders are going to dip down, which is going to mean every back exercise you do, you're just going to hit your traps. So say you're doing something like bent over rows, if you can't keep your chest up while you're doing those bent over rows, it's going to dip forward, and everything you do is just going to become a shrug rather than access the mid and lower parts of your back that you're actually trying to hit. So I'm not going to lie to you, if you have crappy posture you can still build decent arms, and I did before I got the injury and that sort of thing, but you're not ever going to have a good looking chest or a good looking back unless you actually fix the issues with regards to your posture, which you probably have issues with if you live in society today, let's be honest, because most of the things that we do are causing us to sit in a frontward plane, whether it's sitting on a toilet, sitting at a desk, looking at your phone, anything along those lines is all pulling you forward, but we don't have a lot of stuff pulling us back. So that's the why you should care about the posture stuff, even if you've never had any kind of injuries before, because you will get an injury in the future if you continue to train with poor posture, and it's going to make your physique look better, right? So next I want to talk about what I'm actually doing and the positions that I'm trying to adopt in order to make sure that my posture is fluid and I'm building the muscle in the areas that I want to build. Now that we've talked about the reasons why I'm doing the postural improvement work, let's get into the how. So the first thing that you have to understand when it comes to doing postural improvement work is it's closer to the process of a baby learning to walk than it is the process of going into a gym and lifting a bunch of heavy weights. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the process of a baby learning to walk, it's a consistent problem where they go and they try to do it and their muscles aren't developed yet in order for them to do the process of walking. They see what it is they're trying to do and they know how because they're looking at adults and they can see how to walk, but they haven't built up the muscles yet. So what happens? They go, they try, and then they fall. And then they'll go and they'll eat and they'll go to sleep, and then the next day they'll be a little bit stronger. And it's a constant repetition of this process that eventually leads them to get to the point where they can stand, and then they kind of fall over, and then they start to build up those stabilizers, and eventually they can walk. So how does that relate to your postural stuff? Well, if you think that you can start doing your postural stuff with the same weight that you're using with other things, you're going to have a problem, right? So to give you context, when I started implementing the postural things, let's say something like my deadlift, I'm doing an empty bar, right? And I have been doing that for a few months now, and you might say, well, you know, how can you consistently make gains in an empty bar? And the reason is because gradually you make it harder, right? When you start off doing some of the postural implement stuff, you're not actually going to be able to do the movement at all. You're going to be using other muscle groups that you're not supposed to use. So how does that relate to something like a deadlift? Well, on a deadlift, what you'll see a lot of people do if they have rounded shoulders is their chest will pull forward, which will mean they can't get access to their lower and mid back muscles, so they'll end up using their traps, right? So when they're doing their deadlift, they'll be bending and moving like that, okay? So they'll engage their traps instead of having
the posture like that. So, you know, how does that develop over time? Well, at first you're kind of pushing in the way that you can, and that might only be a little, you know, 5% better than you normally would have done, but then you work up, right? So like one week it's like 5% better, so like 5% of the loads going to the area you want to go, and then the next week it's 10%, the next week it's 15%. So you can still use the empty bar and still continue to make gains. It's just you're progressively making it harder by pushing into a movement that you're not familiar with, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be time consuming, and it's going to take ages. And then you might say, well, why would I even bother, right? Like if it's going to be so time consuming, it's going to be so difficult, I don't want to go through all that period and not make muscle gains. Well, that's where the funny thing comes in, right? You actually make more muscle gains by doing this sort of thing because you're working on areas that have zero development. So if you already have a decent amount of muscles in your biceps and you go and try and make them grow, because you've already got a sufficient amount of muscle there, the process is slower because you're going from, say, I don't know, just to make up a number, say you're going from like 20 to 25. The process of going from 20 to 25 is a lot slower than the process of going from 0 to 10, because from 0 to 10 you're starting from nothing, so the muscle gains come quite quickly. It's just they're harder to spot because, you know, as we talked about in the previous video, tracking muscle progress is hard. It's not as simple as looking at the weights that you're using and seeing progress. Muscle development takes time and it's hard to spot. So what's another thing then you can look for in terms of the how? Well, for the upper body stuff, a lot of it comes down to having your shoulders back and keeping your chest up. But what about the lower body stuff? Well, if you look at something like a squat or a deadlift, typically people have a similar issue where they use things in the frontal plane, right? What does that mean? Well, it means when they try to bend, they tend to be knee benders. So they'll put their knees in forward quite a lot. So whether they're squatting, they'll throw their knees in, or if they're deadlifting, they'll throw their knees in quite a lot. And that was a problem that I had too. So when I started with my deadlift, I was getting a lot of knee pain and I didn't really know why. And it was because I was bending too much at the knees for my deadlift, and I was letting my knees tuck in and kind of roll in this fashion instead of letting them flow in the natural direction of my toes. So how did I fix that? Or well, still fixing it, right? I'm trying to keep the distribution further at the hip and balance it, right? So that you're getting even balance between your knees and your hips. And some of you might be hip benders, but they're a lot less common in my experience than knee benders. Most people tend to bend at the knee a lot more than the hips. But whichever one you are, if you're getting pain either in your hips or your knees, when you're doing your squats or your deadlifts, it might be because your distribution is off, and that's something that you need to recenter. Now that we've kind of talked about the what, you know, it's kind of difficult out of context. You just see me standing here talking about it. So now I'm going to actually show you a clip of my deadlifts, and be advised, I'm a student, I'm not a master at this, so you're going to see me making mistakes, you're going to see issues with the form, because it's a work in progress, right? You're not seeing the end result here with me. I've been technically training less than a year straight because I had to stop in that first kind of year, so you're not seeing a finished product here. You're seeing someone who's on the way to getting there, and hopefully you can take something from that too. So now I'm going to cut to the clip of the deadlift training and my commentary over that. This is set 1 of a total of 3 sets for the deadlifts. So kicking things off then, we'll start with the obvious. I talked about before, this is not a finished product. This is something that I'm actively working on. So there's some things that I am doing right and there's some things that I'm doing wrong. Now, the thing that I'm doing wrong will appear maybe visually obvious, that it looks kind of weird, right? But the why is a little bit more complicated. So you see, as I'm coming down in that first set, I'm kind of, there's almost an over exaggerated bend in my lower back, and I only really picked up on that when I watched the footage back. It's difficult to say why that is. You can see that I'm trying to drive my chest up to keep my shoulders back, and I think, you know, what I need to be doing from there is kind of letting my upper body drop a wee bit more total while still keeping the chest up, rather than having too much of an arch in that lower back, and it almost seems exaggerated from that position. I think that's what's going on there, but it's difficult to say. It just seems like it needs a little bit more of a bend. Now, after seeing that, of course, then I kind of made a little bit of an adaptation for the second set, which hopefully we'll be able to see the difference of, and I'll kind of talk about some of the things that are going right. Now for the second set, you'll see what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make there be a straight line
from my bum, my upper back and my head, and there should be a bit of a curve in my neck and a bit of a curve in my lower back. There's kind of too much of a curve in the lower back, and that's obviously something that I need to work on, so that's something that I'll be doing, trying to fix for the next set of deadlifts, because I'm putting a lot of strain on the muscles in my lower back doing that. It is obviously a lower back exercise, but it's still something that I need to work on. Now, another thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to not let my knees pull forward too much, because I was getting a lot of knee pain. I'm trying to drive back at the hips more, which I think is where I'm finding a bit of difficulty, because in the act of me pushing my bum back, it's putting a lot of strain on my lower back, and I'm still kind of finding the rhythm of how far I need to drop my upper body and push my lower body back. The technical term for this form of deadlifts is Romanian deadlifts, which is where you start the deadlift from the top and you only go down to your knees and you don't actually sink it. So what I mean by sinking it is when you get to that point in your knees and you let the weight touch the ground. The reason I'm doing this particular style of deadlifts is because it's these muscles that I'm struggling with. It's not necessarily the act of a squat that I'm struggling with, so I'm kind of focusing more on this part because I find it really difficult, because I have issues with the muscles in my upper back, my lower back, my bum and my hamstrings. The Romanian deadlifts allow me to correct the posture a little bit better. Lastly, here for the third set, I wanted to show my knees. So you'll see like a little bit of a wobbling in my knees. That's they're screaming at me to roll into the middle, right? They want to pull into the middle, and I'm trying to keep them out wide. When I say out wide, I just mean in a normal position, right? Like in line with the direction of my toes, because I've got weak hip flexors, so it's making my knees want to pull in, and I'm trying to keep them out wide, so this kind of gives you a nice scope of that. Obviously I'm trying to do it nice and slow and controlled, which is, to be honest, really difficult in this exercise. I'm using a lot of muscles that, you know, have been dormant for a long time and have been very weak. You're kind of seeing this 2 months in, so if you saw this on the first day, you probably wouldn't learn a whole lot, because it was pretty awful. So it's came a long way since then, but clearly there's still things that I need to work on, and a lot of the times it feels very 2 steps forward, 1 step back, where I feel like I've got it, and then there's this new thing that creeps up that I have to fix. So it's not something that is going to be fixed overnight. It is just something that I'm going to be working on over the course of months until I can get it right, and only when I can get it right will I ever consider putting weight on the bar, because increasing the load when you can't perform the movement anyway is just going to make it more difficult than it needs to be, and so you'll end up recruiting muscles that you don't want to recruit. So these are my deadlifts so far. They're not great, obviously. It is something I'm working on, and I've only really started in deadlifts in the past couple of months, but hopefully they'll improve in the future.
I hope you've taken something from this video that you can use to help you in your own personal fitness journey. As always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll answer them all myself personally, because I want to make sure that you get the best results for you. Last little note, I want to thank all of you that have subscribed so far. I hope you're benefiting from the content, and I hope you will in the future too. I've been Connor, take care, and I'll see you next week.